Coming through.
Hello, everyone. It is our pleasure today to be joined by Dr. Stephen Cureton. He is the department head of sociology at the University of Carolina at Greensboro. And we have quite an interesting topic to talk about today. So we want to just dive right in, Dr. Cureton, and ask you about your body of work. So we're really curious about the central themes or maybe driving questions that have motivated you in your research and writing, because I can definitely see a through line there. So talk to us a little bit about what that is and how you came to the body of work that you've published.
Okay, I guess I'll go and think in terms of it was one of my sociology students. I teach an African American social thought class, and they were asking about the very same thing. With all that you do, what is the running theme? And as I thought about it, I thought about Du Bois's double consciousness and the primary question that was asked in the Souls of Black Folk way back in 1903. How does it feel to be a problem? And that narrative, that question, it just runs through everything that I've done in terms of research. The Black males are problematic in their presentation when they walk on the scene. What is the value of skin tone? What are the reactions to it on the legal level, on the formal level, or informal level? And what's the commodification of the body, which has led to my NFL work? How is the Black male body dealt with in the legal system, which led to my consulting? How is the participation of Black males in gangs seen as more deviant, criminal, and violent than white gangs and Hispanic gangs, which led to that part? So the running theme will certainly be the question of how does it feel to be a problem? Does not these things enrage you? And W.E.B. Du Bois said to the question, he said nothing, but he had nothing but silence. But the bigger question of it all was they were trying to figure out what is the level of concern you have within when you know that you are perceived to be a problem, and that's what he called double consciousness. I know what you think of me and what I think about myself, and I know that the measuring tape that you use is centralized on the European gaze. And I have a war within because I have to be able to combat those things to function properly in a way that makes you feel comfortable. And so that's the running theme. Now, my job as a sociologist, which is what we call a discovery major. I mean, people don't just like become a sociologist. They take a class and it hits them. And so my job was, okay, well, what's if race is socially constructed, then so too is masculinity. Then becomes the question, how is it constructed? But at the same time, I don't get away from the original question that W.E.B. Du Bois asked, how does it feel to be a problem? And so that goes through all of my research, whether we're talking about differential arrest rates, whether we're talking about African Americans in academia, whether we're talking about it being on a football field, whether we're talking about it being in the legal system, whether we're talking about gangs, whether we're talking about the hidden curriculum, so to speak. And so when I think about the hidden curriculum in terms of once an individual hits formal education, the hidden curriculum is, through my research, is telling kids that, particularly minority kids, Black and brown kids, that you have to learn as much about the dominant group, and the dominant group being centered around white male heterosexuality, to just be able to function in a system like this. And that same dominant group does not have to know anything about you. And so they can be very, very nonchalant about what it means to be you, but you can't be nonchalant about what it means to be them, because that's the process of integration and assimilation, uh, which is taking into your mind everything that makes them feel comfortable in order for you to exist reasonably and righteously uh, in mainstream society. So all of that being said, that just drives all of the research that I'm doing. Hope that makes
Wow.
sense.
Oh, yeah, it does. As you were speaking, uh, it made sense to me. But then I was thinking, and Patrice, maybe you want to jump in too. Is there any literacy moment that we want to provide? Because we like to do that on the show for our listeners. And I was trying to reflect on as you were speaking, what might people get a little stuck on? Nothing's coming to mind for me. Anything for
When
you?
you say get
Yeah.
stuck on, what do you mean?
Like, what might they not fully understand based on what you were just sharing? Because you dropped a lot of amazing, like, knowledge there around the different ways in which Black people, particularly Black men, move through this society that is really measured under the dominant culture, which is
Hmm.
around, the white heterosexual male.
Hmm.
You also, something you talked about that I actually do want to circle back to more recently, the government, right, released that they're going to go back to this biological two sexes.
Yes.
And you named, right? And I believe too, that masculinity is a construct.
Yes.
So can you walk maybe through that a little bit around what does that mean to you that masculinity is a construct?
Well, we're all in sociology, I'll say. And so my perspective is sociological. It's the same thing I would say in the classroom, that we are social creations of our most intimate personal groups, which could be our mom and our dad, circumstances or events. It really, really defines the narrative of how we see ourselves, how we carry ourselves, how we express masculinity. Like, for example, boys don't cry. There's an element of toughness about you. There's a desensitization towards violence, so to speak, when you're growing up in certain areas. Um, when you are, because my daughter's 26 now. There was just a different set of normative expectations that I had for her, as opposed to when my nephew came to live with me, and that I had for him. I had to give him a separate set of rules. I mean, because you are black and male, if there is, for example, four young men who are in a car, please call me and I'll come and get you, because four black men in the car is problematic if they get pulled over. Um, and I allowed him to do certain things. Maybe his curfew was extended because he was a male. Now, it pivot, having a daughter, her curfew may be 2 or 3 hours earlier. So what I'm saying is, it's just how we socially construct gender and ways of being. A lot of that is changing now, in terms of, and this is why I love female sports, women in sports, because they're changing narrative that you can be all these things and not necessarily conform to what people define as just male and female. That you can literally express yourself differently, and this is where identification comes into mind. How you identify. Now, of course, the legal system is saying it's not how you identify. There's just two sexes, male and female. So you had that entire argument out there. We have the luxury of being on a college campus where you can have your pronouns, you can have they and them, and you can have those things. But now these students are being confronted with, all right, once you leave the university, how is society seeing you? Are they allowing you rooms to do this? And again, it's not just about your social setting, because we can get away, those of us who think of ourselves differently, we can get away in our own social groups and our social networks and feel completely comfortable. But the things that we need to exist and have a standard of living comes from how much we are able to integrate into mainstream. And part of that integration means we have to set aside, word code switch, to fit in so that we could just go to work. Um, Particularly when you're talking about corporate America, when you're talking about mainstream America, in a way that makes other people feel comfortable about our presence. And so, one of the things that I want people to understand, that when we talk about social construction, that we all are socially constructed based on our friendship groups, based on our family, based on dynamics that impact us. And the social construction is fluid. It's not. It doesn't get stuck in time. So I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I'm not the same person that I was before my daughter was born. I'm not the same person that I was in undergrad. I'm not the same person that I was even 5 years ago. I'm not the same person that I was before I became chair. So this is what I mean about social construction. Social forces act on you, and it begins to change and evolve how you see yourself. So again, we're not even just in a new political regime that's taken over since January. It's forced us to sort of react to what's coming next. We've seen our friends be harmed by the executive orders that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, Not just the whole idea of the firings, but the idea that you set the entire country back to a very basic and very 1920s, 30s mindset that anything that's not white male heterosexual is a standard deviation. And that standard deviation represents enough of a difference to say it's less than. But at the same time, you want to say merit drives everything, but you already threw out DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as the issue that is an enemy to what you call merit. All along, anyone who attempts to function in this country knows that you got to be twice as good to get half as much. And so when people look at you, and even though you've earned every bit of where it is you are, they look at you as somehow you took somebody else's job. When in reality, you are positioned to where you are because you beat out that person in a legitimate process. And so what it does is it gives others excuses that, hey, we can accept when we're not good enough, and we have to move on and try to get better because that's how we're taught. But when you have that crutch of DI or affirmative action or whatever word, critical race theory, whatever it is they're throwing out there, it makes those who consider themselves center, white male heterosexuals, who consider themselves center, like these are the entitlements that I have, and you took those from me. And so it creates this social narrative that there's a value gap between differences in races. And that's the problem. It's just the idea of a value of life that's attached to the conversation. And so people have to socially reconstruct again. We moved in the era, and I'm 56, so I can say it wasn't the same during my time where mental health is a primary concern. We never discussed that as I was growing up, and particularly in the Black community. I never paid much attention to mental health until my daughter became a clinical therapist. Just wasn't part of the conversation that this is something that particularly Black men actually talk about or address. So learning from her that, how is your mental health? How are you feeling today? Those are questions that males very rarely get asked. And when you do ask us, we start talking about how we perform, job, family, resources. And then if you say, well, how are you? We can't really answer that question without becoming uncomfortable because you're telling us to be vulnerable. So to sort of just put us all in the same boat. If you are not white male heterosexual, you are a standard deviation from that. That deviation has definitions associated with it. If you're white and female, although you may have some attachments and some luxuries to the white male, you're not that. Let's not forget that Donald Trump's 2 wins was against a white woman and a Black woman. So this country is affirming that they're uncomfortable with white women being in power, with Black women being in power. And so while we have all these narratives about what's empowering to women, when it really came down to the most powerful leadership position, even the 2 most qualified women lost because of a vote and a popular vote to a man in many respects who's just less qualified. I don't say too many negative things about this president. I observe a lot of negative things, but I don't get into political debates because you're just not going to change people's mind. They are where they are. So all these talk shows are certainly it's just theater because people are just set. And now everybody's arguing. And they're laying out these differences. No one is listening. But the idea is that unless you are white male, and I keep saying this over and over again, everybody else is a standard deviation from that, on the good side and the bad side. So what connects all of us is the fact that unless you are there in that center, then the conversation about critical race theory, DEI, affirmative action, that's about you as well. If you have different sexual identity and politics, certainly that goes along with the conversation. We all have, every one of us, as soon as we walk into the room, we have a political definition on us. We are a political body. So those are the things that unify us as a people, regardless of where it is you come from, that we make political statements upon arrival to people. There's an assessment. And part of people's assessment is, how are you socially constructed? Part of the assessment is how are they socially constructed? Because then they have psychological processes that are operating in their minds to sort of inform their opinions of who they think you are. Du Bois comes into the equation again with double conscious and says, we have to think about, because we're not in the center, how we combat the narratives of who you are. And at the same time, have the conversation. I don't know if any of you ever do this, but I do it a lot. I mean, I talk to myself and I answer myself. And things that happen during the day, I'll be like, well, especially if it follows me home, I'll stand in the mirror. I was like, well, what does that mean? What were they thinking? How did you respond? Will it bleed into the next day? And that stuff just follows you home. There's been times where there's been situations where it has been so much on my mind that I've driven home and I was intoxicated by the interaction. And so the default kicked in. I don't know if you've ever driven home and don't remember any turns, but you're home because you were so mentally consumed about something that happened during your day that called into question. Not that you're questioning yourself, but it called into question how other people see you at a critical time, maybe when you thought you had support. So those are the things that certainly is the idea of, and I think you want to talk a little bit about the hidden curriculum. When we talk about curriculum in and of itself, we're talking about what people are learning in the classrooms that allow us to get along with each other, become informed about one another's lifestyle. So what's happening in this country is being informed about differences doesn't matter. What's center, what's right, what's powerful, what's rich, resources, an element of bullying, catering to, bowing down to. These are all sort of power dynamics that's kicking back in that we have to come to grips with. So again, all of that continues to be in my research through what I teach, through what I write, through how I come across in the courtroom, and also understanding the responsibility that I am a political statement when I walk into a room, because people are going to say, who is he? How did he get here? Is he DEI? And even when you open your mouth and you teach about certain things, you still have people who question you. I can remember first walking into classrooms and I would have white males who would have their laptops and they would just basically go online and try to make sure that I was saying what was truthful. And the beautiful thing about that is, first of all, my education was stellar. From Washington State University, my mentor, Charles Tittle, was stellar. And he alerted me to what those challenges would be. The beautiful moment is, as you go into and get into the semesters, those laptops close and these students become your biggest fans because they have young minds. They haven't fully bought into a lot of the sort of old traps that a former generation or older generation has infused in them. And now they're learning something new. And now they're breaking down barriers. And then they go home and they carry different conversations to their parents. And I'm a part of that. So I love the intellectual currency that I create with the most resistant student. I want you to come in there with confusion. I want you to come in there with your racist and your homophobic view. I want all those things there. I want you to bring all of that to the table. And my idea is not to change that, but to give you information to rethink it. And if you still feel the same way, I mean, again, you can't say I was uninformed or I didn't know. So that's my job is to basically push information that you could use to make informed decisions about marrying someone, about social networking, about employment, about hearing cases of people who offend the law, about because one day you may sit on a jury, or one day you may get in a position of being in control of someone's healthcare, someone's mental agency, someone's family dynamics, and you are informed through sociology or through classes that, you know what, it puts me in a better position to understand the personhood from which I am dealing with. And that allows me to make decisions. And that's where professional discretion can come into play. That's how I see my responsibility. I'm not ready to retire from it, but I not only see it in the classroom, I see it when I go down and visit young men and women who are on trial for capital murder and facing the death penalty.
So we're going to dive a little further into some of those subjects that you really just highlighted. Before we do, one of the things that really struck me that you named is that we all bring this humanity, right? And this socialized humanity almost, right, to the table. And yet we're not always listening to each other. And
Right.
so I heard you offer a new way of engaging because oftentimes, right, in these particularly political conversations, it's very charged. People are polarized. And I heard an invitation in what you were saying is instead of coming to the table with that conversation, come to the table with yourself as this political body and present that in a way that really represents you to the fullest.
Mhm.
And I thought that was such a beautiful invitation because right now in our country, and maybe and in a lot of ways throughout our entire country's history, we really haven't been able to come to the table and hear each other and learn from each other and
Yeah.
see each other's humanity. And so I really love that invitation that you're providing to us. And we're not trying to change minds. We're trying to help provide a new perspective, potentially a new narrative that
Yes.
people then can ask themselves questions and
Yes.
almost employ that their own,
Right. Right.
questioning around, well, how am I being seen and
Yeah. So one of the things I do, especially when I do the motivational talks and I go into white Presbyterian churches or wherever it is I'm invited, and I always start off the conversation with a quote by Malcolm X, and then they automatically they're offended. Okay, he's using Malcolm X now. We got an issue, and he says a good line. Except I call you by name, I'm not talking about you. I don't know you. Rather, I'm referring to the country's collective record over the history of African Americans or Black people in this country. And so I open it with, except I call you by name, I don't know you. I'm talking about the collective record. Now, use your own lived experience to see whether you have some distance from the collective record or you are aligning with it. And only you can be the judge of that. So if you are feeling talked about, that's not my intention. My intention is to present a set of facts. If they reflect upon you and you feel like I'm talking about you, then that's your problem. But then there are those who are in the room and I'm just talking to them because it resonates with them because their lived experiences is so far away from society's collective conscious, collective record of treating people in a bad manner. So they see that distance in their lives, and that is more valuable than anybody walking in the room and say, you're a racist or you're this or that. However, if you looked at their behavior over time, then they themselves can come to that realization in the privacy of their thoughts and choose to move with it or not move with it. And that's completely up to them. And so I've been in very hostile environments where, the students will pick it after a talk, and as soon as I walk out, they'll just part and let you walk through. Because what you didn't do is you didn't lie to them. And this is what I like about young people in their mindset. They don't want to be lied to. Some of them, they want to hear things that are comfortable. And some are just going to stay in that ilk because this is how they grew up and the parents are good people in their mind. So they don't want to offer a sense of betrayal to how they grew up. And some of them feel comfortable staying where they are because this is what the town promotes. Again, that's the social construction. But I see these college students on a daily basis, and they literally come to you after class and say, I feel refreshed in the fact that I am allowed to feel and think and be different. And I know that when I go home, I may have to conform or try to talk to my parents or my friends about what it is that I'm learning in a college environment. And does that mean that everybody has to go to college? No, life itself is an educational experience if you are open to it. And I think Barack Obama was one of the ones who said it in a quite beautiful way that, hey, people are people. And in his mind, after a sustained period of time, when you associate with people, they will come to recognize their individual flaws. Now, what that sustained period of time is, it varies amongst people. But you're not going to get people to change their minds unless it resonates somehow, a difference in who they want to be in your company. And so if you have those who are offended by the fact that DEI was diversity, equity, and inclusion, took away their opportunity to get to know people, then the reaction to that is, why do you need an executive order to say who you can and can't talk to on and off the job? If you are a true ally and a true friend, nothing like that is going to stop you from the pursuit of knowledge. And so if I hear a person say to me, can we have a conversation about race? One of the things that I would do is say, well, have you ever read anything from all of the important people outside of white male heterosexuals who have devoted their entire lives to explain to you what it means to walk in their shoes? And so why would I have a conversation about race if you're not serious enough to say, hey, I've tried to read something and I don't understand it? Or like you just said, hey, can you give us a reference? Can you give us something that people can lean on? And it's double consciousness. I mean, we all go through it. Rethinking who we are, being at war from within, thinking about our innermost thoughts and how they compare to what society is saying about us, because we all are socially constructed, coming out of a bad relationship and saying, I'm never going to do that again, because that relationship socially reconstructed us in a way that we know what's good for us and we know our value and we know what we're worth and we move forward. Everybody goes through these things. So I think the narrative, if you will allow people in power to stick to it just being white male heterosexual, we all become stagnant in our conversations amongst one another. And we all distance ourselves from the fact that there's some human elements about who we are that centralizes us to an energy that's bigger than all of us. And it unites us in a way that talks about equitable personhood that can't be dictated by any civil action, any executive order, because it's a personhood mindset and how we want to pursue things in our lives. Those are the types of things that at the grassroots level can blow up to become something very effective and unified and move people to vote one way or the other, or to learn one way or the other, or to desire one way or the other. So, for example, UNC-Greensboro, we got rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're just following the executive order. We've taken markers off any of the classes that suggest that, and we can't require students to take that class. However, the same semester, we say that every incoming freshman, fall 2025, have to take a Foundations of America's course. And so they have to learn about the Constitution. They have to learn about the Federalist Papers. They have to learn about the Bill of Rights. They have to learn about the Gettysburg Address. And they have to learn about the letter from Birmingham jail. Now, I don't know who came up with these 5 or 6 sources, but instead of a person of color, a Black male, rebuffing this, I signed up to teach that class. Like, okay, because now you get to really, really understand what was in the Constitution and Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and the Gettysburg Address and the letter for Birmingham jail. Oh, you want to put me in a room to teach that? Oh, there's ways to do that. And so, whereas people were saying this is a very patriotic statement that centers white maleness, even though many of them were the authors of this, there were some elements in personhood of our forefathers that resonate over time. Now, they were situated differently in terms of owning slaves and being in a position of power to dictate what others were saying, but an energy of equitability came out of what they were writing. And so just because they were who they were at that time doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be that in 2025. America is still a young nation. It's still open to a lot of problems. But somehow we think that we are more morally advanced than the oldest of nations, because we feel that our mental capacity is more superior than those who are around us. And that centers on white male heterosexuality, that they're the most moral, hold the most integrity, and the most rationalized minds that you can ever come across. And we know through our lived experiences that that's not true. But at the same time, you can't fault them for wanting to hold on to that power, hence replacement theory. And that's what drove the idea of this election, that we just don't want to be replaced. We don't want our entitlements infringed upon. And so again, there were just those who voted for that. There were those who voted for, even though they were on the outside, they were a part of minority. They voted for Donald Trump. And again, as we are seeing these things come into fruition, the best teachers of knowledge is experience. It's nothing we can really say that's going to measure up to how people are going to digest what's going to happen to them during these next 4 years. Nothing we can say is going to measure to what's going to happen. So we can sit up here and say, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. We don't have to say anything. Let people experience it, see where they come out the next day or the next month or the next year. And then those are the things that's going to drive them to vote differently or not. What is your messaging going to be about as it reflects upon how it is that they experience this particular regime? Again, it all goes back to lived experiences, personhood, social construction, because we all are going to pivot and change based on this presidency, where we are so irate at times because we know that facts matter. And this administration doesn't seem to think that facts matter. The only facts that matter are the ones that make this regime feel comfortable. So what do? We are in positions of power in teaching. We say facts do matter. We also have to confront AI and say that, yes, facts matter, but you can put all this stuff in AI, but at a certain point in time, you're going to have to show and prove everything that you wrote about, all the papers you turned in, the answers. Somebody's going to ask you something that you use AI for, and then it's going to become problematic because now you're going to be talking about having to answer to someone who's your employer. In school, you can get away from it because it's a grade, and you can play this game, or if I wrote it or I didn't write it, and you can do all these things that you can do that. But when it comes to what you're going to have to do in the real world, in college is practicing the real world. The educational system is practicing the real world. It's about being on time. It's about respecting authority. It's about operating within the rules. It's about getting to know someone who is outside of your family. From the moment you enter college, that's from the moment you enter school, that's what it's about. How is my personhood going to be able to integrate, be a part of a group that could be different from my home life? Because at a certain point in time, the home life is going to be where you go when you want to visit on holidays. But in the meantime, you have to exist amongst people who are just going to continue to be different. Nobody's going to come back to the center of just being white male and heterosexual or close to that. We're all just going to continue to evolve and be different. And we also have to deal with the reality as we continue with AI that we're going to start having to interact with robots, and they're programming with robots, and this whole technology that's going to take people's jobs. It's not necessarily going to be as sympathetic about the human touch, and we're going to start missing that and what it felt like. So we have to think about the nature of people's mental health, the sociological platforms, their perspectives, and what is all that going to mean 20, 30 years from now when all the technology we lean on begins to take over. I think about that when I go to grocery stores, and I remember just the conversations that you used to have with cashiers, different people. I mean, man, now it's self-checkout. It's just you do your own stuff. Yes, it's faster, but it's not personable. I mean, you get in and you get out, and people like that. I mean, that's fine. That's what those lines are for. But you took jobs and you took the human touch from the shopping experience. And there's going to become a point in time where that is, in and of itself, is going to create divisions amongst people, because we're not going to know how to relate to one another and understand people's personhood. Or, as Durkheim would say, just like crime has a function, technology has a function to bring people together to see how they matter as human beings in a different way from technology. So again, all of that is causing people to socially evolve, be socially constructed as time moves on.
Thank you so much. You shared such robust information. It's like so deep in so many different ways. So many different questions are coming up for me around social forces and this idea of like, how are we socially constructed and how do we grapple with that or not? Some of us don't, right? We have the luxury of not, some of us anyway. So we'd love to invite you now to share with us a bit about your forthcoming book, The Killing Kind, Breeding a Creed of Black Murderers.
Yes.
Even that topic in and of itself is chock full of energy and inquiry for me anyway. So tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to tackle this subject and sort of what you hope readers will gain from the book as they engage it.
So that book came as a result. It's really a sort of an extension of the Hoover Crips, When Cripping Becomes a Way of Life, which was my first book in 2008, in which I went to South Central Los Angeles to understand gang members. And from that, I got my first consulting case. And again, it was a death penalty case where a young man was accused of murdering a security guard in an armored car truck heist. And so I got my lesson in how you are dealing with individuals and their families, because that matters as well with respect to who you are as a person. That brought into me the idea that my agency as a Black male who grew up in a certain area proved important to be able to go into communities of single moms who are dealing with a son who is incarcerated and a father's not in the home, because all that stuff I grew up around. So I had human agency, and I always tell my students, don't negate the importance of your human agency. It's going to factor into what you do. And so I took my first case and ended up getting the young man life without the possibility of parole. He was not happy. He told me to my face, "Hey, you didn't save a life, you ruined a life." And I'm like, "Well, I actually didn't do anything to put you here, but okay." And then after that case, it just started building momentum. And I'm like, okay, every time I go into and I request to visit all of them, I call them clients. Most people say defendants. All of the individuals I go into and I make a request to sit down and talk to them. And I do not like talking to anyone in shackles. I don't care what it is that they've done. And 98% of the jails oblige. They take the shackles off, and then they'll say, if something happens, we might not get to you on time. But I've never been worried about that, because I felt that there was a different calling, a different energy. And this is where Pressure Killers came along. The book is about the energy of what happens and what pushes people to engage in such a behavior. And so when I go into these rooms and I start looking at these individuals, and I look into their eyes, and you can see that there's a difference. You can see that there was a decision to take a life. If you've never taken a life, you know you don't have that pressure. Have you faced a similar circumstance that would put you in that position? There have been cases where I really, really thought I could be this person. 56-year-old father defending his daughter. I'm 56. I have a daughter. I would have done the same thing. That's a pressure, the pressure of manhood and protection, the pressure to be seen as a father figure. And so the book is about the energy that pushes us, forces us to engage in something that we otherwise wouldn't do. So what are the pressures of a young Black male who grew up in a certain area when they're confronting the subculture of violence? This is how you settle your disputes. What are the pressures of a young woman? And I'm thinking about the cases that I've dealt with. What are the pressures of a young woman who had a different sexual identity type of affirmation? She loved being around men, and the gang world is dominated by men. But by being around men, she was in a position where other men would see her as not a woman, and so they would shoot at her. And so she was shot at. And a year later, she ran into the same guy that shot at her. Now, the jury needed to understand that the threat of violence to that magnitude, especially when somebody shoots at you, doesn't dissipate because it happened a year ago. She felt equally as threatened a year later than she was at that time. And so when she saw this man approach her, her default mechanism was self-protection, and she ended up shooting and taking his life. Very remorseful about it, chose to do time. She didn't do the full time, but she chose to do time, and she could have really gone to court and actually beaten it in self-defense, but she just said that I just feel a certain kind of way. I took a life. That's a different kind of energy. But the pressure for her was to take a life. Now, again, one of the most powerful things that she said is, had I not been in this situation, I could have been on a scholarship in a dorm room playing basketball. But because of this, I don't have a dorm room, I have a jail cell. And I want people to understand that social construction on the other side of the gun, the other side of the trigger, is someone who felt pressured enough to act in a certain way. And so the book is going to drive home the narrative that we may not have felt the pressure to kill someone, or maybe we did and we decided not to because we were controlled differently. And so the book talks about that just because you didn't do it doesn't make you better than the person who actually did. You just had more controlling things that was going on, and you were able to escape the moment and think, I can deal with this another way. Whereas the pressure at that moment was pushed to the fact where I had to make a decision. I think police officers will understand this book because they engage in what we call furtive gestures. Furtive gesture in the shooting is they feel as if the next move that a person could make might cost them their lives. And so it is their job as a police officer and a person who wants to go home to their family to make sure that that furtive gesture, the next move, is met with enough resistance so that that police officer can go home. That's pressure because it happens in a matter of seconds. And then we get to quarterback the police officer's decision and say it was an unjust shooting, but they were engaging in the idea of a furtive gesture. Now, what does that come to? It comes to the social construction of the person on the other side, typically somebody who is not white and male. It is usually someone who is seen as more criminal, whether it's a black and a brown body, and that does not even exclude women anymore. We know that minority women, black women in particular, get gunned down close to 36%, which is almost close to black males without carrying. So again, the idea of how black women are socially constructed is just as dangerous or has dangerous consequences as black men. But getting back, I want people to understand that with each case, there's an element of pressure. We have no idea. If you didn't grow up in the area of social media, we have no idea what a social media fingerprint or reputation, how that matters to these young men. But we all, some of us, if we're in a older generation, we know that we're glad cameras weren't around when we grew up because I mean we did things, that we wouldn't want forecasts and people click on it like or not. If I lost a fight or somebody got the best of me, you know, if you weren't there to see it, you only heard about it. And I got a chance to repair and move on. Nowadays, it's filmed and it's shared, and people like it, and they comment it, and it puts a sense of how is that person who's on the other end of that losing going to retaliate and repair their reputation. Why? Because we're all socially constructed. And so we are in a humiliation era. Uh, and a person's grief and a person's hurt and harm and wrong is now comedy. And so that's a lot of pressure on a lot of young people who are advanced in their particular lifestyle where they're from. And the repercussions of what's going to happen after that doesn't really matter. The idea is that I engage in a culture of honor, and that's Gilligan's concept, a culture of honor. My pride came before anything else. So that's what Pressure Killer brings to the forefront. It is an intimate conversation of those who are on trial for capital murder. What's behind the scenes, what their emotions are. All of them, except for two, have cried. All of them, except for maybe five, have been remorseful. All of them just trying to do something to change an outcome that didn't mean that they were the ones that were going to be killed. And so I know on the other side of this, a person who reads that book and will say, oh, you're trying to help us. You're trying to get us to condone murder. There's victims to this. And I talk about being in the courtroom where you're hearing victim impact statements and what pressure it is for them to speak about their loss. I think where the book may garner some criticism is that those who are a part of victimization will say, I don't attempt to make individuals out to be angels, because one of the things that I say in the courtroom is if you're engaging in subculture of violence, it has a calling on your body. So I speak to it in a way that people understand that you knew if the person was running the streets that somehow the streets were going to claim them. But when you get to the victim impact statement, yes, you miss them. You miss when they came home, because when everybody comes home, they're normal. But when they're in the streets, they have a different social construction. And that carries meanings in and of itself. Then they'll say, well, you're saying this person deserved this. I'm saying when you play that game, then that game is going to have a consequence for you. If I were to keep my hand under a faucet and I know, and we turn it on hot, but it starts off cold, at some point, it's going to elevate to being hot and it's going to burn you. And so I want people to understand that this is what's happening during the course and even the aftermath of a murder, because I talk about institutionalization and how you can have a young man that spent the last 5,096 days in jail and he get out and he reoffends because he can't even complete a grocery store run. He doesn't know, how to go to the grocery store and buy something. But what can he control? He can control the nature of, if I offend, I can go back and live in a structured reality. And that's institutionalization. That's recidivism. Those are things that we combat on a daily basis. So the book, Pressure Killers, certainly deals with the intimacy of murder and the treatment of those who have participated in murder. And what are all the consequences? What are the tentacles? How they spread out? But the source of it is there was a trigger person or a person who used an instrument to take a life. How did that come to be? And so I don't put a person's actual on the crime scene, because this is not about investigating crimes. It's about investing in the social reality of the person that led up to this particular action. So that's that book that I have to turn the manuscript in October. The other book, maybe the NFL, I don't know if you want to start talking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first, I just want to acknowledge that book that you have coming out and how powerful that is and how important it is, I think, to be telling a fuller story that often is missed,
Hmm.
right? In both, you know, statistics, but also in crime in general. I think often people are dehumanized,
Yes.
and creating a space that captures the fullness of someone. And I think so many people don't understand how close any one of us is to a line of those pressures
Yes.
pushing us one way or another,
Yes.
right? And I think that's so important to understand. We're not,
Hmm.
none of us are actually safe from that line.
Right.
And then when you start piling on, as you said, the different ways in which people are socialized, or what they're doing with their time, or things that have been done to them, right? It's
Hmm.
all of these things become different layers of
Yeah.
pressures
Yes.
that push us closer or over that line.
And it allows, and again, I want to give a shout out to Jack Katz, who talked about righteous slaughter. Um, and he talked about the moral and sensual attractions to doing crime. He calls it seductions of crime, the moral and sexual attractions to doing crime. And he talks about righteous slaughter, and he talks about the idea of socially accepted goods and what people would do to protect that. And so when you think about righteous slaughter, you could talk about mass shootings. And I wrote a book chapter on mass shootings. And one of the things that I wanted people to understand in that is the scapegoat is to say mentally ill. That puts people in a position of comfort. But the reality is that mass shootings are dominated by the fact that a person was trying to reclaim some sense of balance in their life to feel human again. And so instead of America saying, hey, let's just look at mental illness, it puts us in control. You don't want to confront the fact that these things are strategically planned. It's horrific. It's a horrific outcome. So what led that person to want to start to engage in that strategic planning of taking life? And that's why it's called symbolic shootings. And so pressure killers is another way of explaining that you're shooting, you're defending a symbol of humanity. It's like you said, how do we come out of this in a way that's respectable? Jack Katz talks about being humiliated, feeling less than human. And the behavior in and of itself brings you back to a human level, even if it means prison
Right. Well, and as you mentioned, we are going to switch gears, and you have the book up behind you. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see Personal Foul Against the NFL. I do want to name that we are both NFL fans. And in fact, in your book, you write a line around, I just want to make sure I get it right, that your love of football remains as innocent as that of a 12-year-old boy. And I do appreciate that as a fellow football fan, and go Eagles. We had
time.
a wonderful season.
Yes.
But you really you spotlight really some of the problematic structures within the NFL. You've been
Yes.
talking throughout the conversation today about DEI, how it has worked and hasn't worked, how some things are retracting. And in the book, you talk a lot about how, well, as much as they say they're moving forward, they're really not,
Right.
right? It's not really happening, and that there are certain power dynamics within the NFL. And you talk a lot about the 105 seasons
Yes.
of the NFL and how this has continually perpetuated
Mhm.
throughout. And so, can you tell us, you know, some key findings that you really feel also reflect, you know, societal
Okay.
power dynamics?
Um, let me start by saying this. Anytime you put out information, and it's an informative book, first person accounts, interviews, and things of that nature from the commissioner all the way down to the most influential people in the NFL. The most revolutionary minded person that inspired a book like this was John Wooten, who is just an exceptional human being and opened my eyes to the reality of this. Um, I also think about James Hasty through N&J Consulting Firm, which is the first African American sports firm that allows a transparent merit-based system to hire coaches. This is why I say in the book that as much as the NFL says they want to solve this problem, without trying to promote, the idea is that you have an African American based company over here that says, hey, we have a transparent way of hiring coaches based on merit. And NFL kind of is like, treating you like, do your own thing. We're not going to recommend or endorse anything like that. We don't want to create an unfair market. So it's sort of a huge sidestep. But what I will say about this book is that all the facts that are in there, which I'm going to just sort of give you a brief synopsis about, the commissioner of the NFL has this book. The legal counsel has this book. Those who are in executive powerful position has this book. And so if it were a lie, and they've had it since November, they would have come out and said, wait a minute, this is a lie. So I will put it like that. I mean, it is not a beautiful book in terms of glorifying the NFL. What it does is it points out the fact that it's a conglomerate. And again, I wrote it out of love because I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I wrote it's still as innocent as that. I do still watch the NFL, but not for reasons that people think. It's not as entertaining to me, but rather how are the players being commodified, following their careers? When they get hurt, what happens to them after that? What access to healthcare and mental health care do they have? And my concern is that the NFL it just keeps spreading. It's hitting Nickelodeon and hitting a younger generation. It's going overseas. It's becoming this international game. It's extending to flag football, which is involving women in sports, which I think is a beautiful thing. It's spreading so much that it just allows people to become desensitized towards the labor force. The labor force, the origins of this are African American athletes. That's not to say that other ethnic groups don't play the sport. When we're talking about who's dominating in sense of percentages, it's African American males. So the book is saying, all right, if we can be on the field for you, if we can have a career, an advanced career that pays us handsomely when it's time to take care of us, in terms of what we invested in terms of can we be the thinking body of the NFL? Can we be taken care of if we become sick by process of playing NFL? The NFL does not reciprocate in equal manner. What I want people to see about this book is that after 105 years, the NFL has done what the NFL will do. It's business. And in that business, you have exploitation, cultural imposition, and co-optation of the Black male body. And by that, I mean that it's just you're commodified and you're property. And so you look at segregation and you look at desegregation and you look at the first Black male head coach, which if the NFL has been around for 105 years, the first Black male head coach was after 69 years of it. So we look at, okay, how was that allowed to be? So we look at how the NFL is treating Black athletes in terms of the intellectual capacity. One of the biggest hits on the NFL is this thing called race norming. And without getting too technical, race norming is basically saying that the intellectual height of the Black male is actually the floor for the white male. And so when they talk about the mental sufferings or the injuries to the brain, race norming is saying that your drop as a Black male is not severe because your ceiling is the floor of a white male. So you're not going to get the same benefits. But a white male who experiences the same drop because his ceiling is higher, he is more likely to get the benefits. That's race norming, and they practice that for 12 years. And the process of it now is in the courts where the NFL and the legal system is making a decision without the actual players being in there. That to me is a problem. Race norming is a fundamental problem. Meritocracy is a problem as well. They throw it around as if, okay, everything is transparent and the best gets the job. And that's absolutely not the case. You do have situations where you have nepotism. And I'm not saying that we all don't do that in some way, shape, form, or fashion, but admit to what it is. Don't then turn around and say, hey, it's about transparency when you had a son or daughter you just gave the position to because they were around you, but they're not necessarily apprentice. They're just by association around you, and they get a job governing and being in a position over men's lives that they don't really know about. They have no concept of how you actually play the game. The Rooney Rule came about to say, all right, even though you say it's about merit, we see nepotism going along. Let's make sure that you expand the field of eligibles before you make the decision. And the problem with the Rooney Rule is that it instituted a policy in practice, but it has loopholes in it that you can still hire who you want. Just look at the field of eligibles. And so what happens is if I know who I want, but there's this policy I have to practice to get to who I want, then I can just ask a few questions here to get you out of the way. And that's why they call it sham interviews. That's a problem with how the NFL has not properly policed the Rooney Rule. And my contention is that the NFL can't police the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule, before it was put into practice in 2003, before that, the history of the NFL says that you had about 1 to 3 black head coaches. After the Rooney Rule, since 2003 and up till now, the average has been, when you think about who's been fired and who's been hiring, 4 or 5 coaches. So the Rooney Rule is only netted over time 2 additional black head coaches. That is a failure. Now, again, all these people less qualified. The idea is stack their resumes up against one another and see who was in the best position to be a head coach. And when we talk about N&J, when you talk about the consulting firm, they look at win and loss records. They look at the qualitative component, who the owner's saying they want to hire. And then it allows people to make a decision. We put everything on the table and may the best person win. That's how it's supposed to be, but it's not. But the NFL is saying that is how it is. And so it's almost as if a person comes to you with a lived experience and they tell you it's not that serious. And the book points out it is that serious. It is as clear as individuals who are billionaires doing exactly what they want to do to the betterment of their family, to the betterment of the NFL, and to the detriment of what we consider merit, what we honor as reasonable decisions, but we're promoting it as this is about merit. So the book is saying, hey, this is in your face. This is what it's about. This is what you're doing. And guess who's complicit in this? And here's another find from this, that Black men who are in positions of power, who have some stake in saying we can make a change, they're okay with the status quo. So if you have a senior vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you would think that this senior vice president will want to solve the issue. Well, if I solve the issue, I would lose my job. So I really don't want to solve the issue. I'll have tepid responses to the issue. And so you can have people in those positions who will say, well, I'm really not here to lose my job, so I'm not going to solve the issue, so I'll be status quo. Or they could block individuals from getting in positions of power, and that's why there's a chapter that talks about HNIC's head negroes in charge, but I'm a little bit more profound than that in the book. They are operating as gatekeepers and protecting the interests of the owners, but when they get before the people, and when they get into the Black communities, or when they get on the talk shows, they read the audience and say, hey, I'm for you. This is what I'm doing. But through my research, which is spanned over 3 years before I even wrote the book, that just is not the case. And again, if somebody puts that in a book about their interactions with you, if it were not true, you should have responded and say, hey, man, this is not what's going on. Or you could say, I don't want to respond. I don't want to give it any light. I don't want to promote what the guy is saying. The book is not written for book sales. This book is written for the idea that somebody someday is going to sit down and say, hey, we can change this.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you say all those things, I've read it in the book, and I mean, it's a story, right, that you can read about a lot of different organizations, sadly, right? But still hearing them out loud is so discouraging. And I love that last line of, yeah, we got to name this, put it out there because we can change it.
Yes.
And so again, another powerful invitation. Well, Dr. Cureton, I so appreciate your time. I know Dr. Patrice Fenton does as well. But we want to leave the audience with, how can they connect with you or follow your work?
Well, I'm not on social media. So,
I understand that.
I'm not on social media. And what I do have a Twitter page, and it's at SoloDog91, something like that.
Okay.
I mean, they can reach out through Twitter, or it's just simple. Go to the UNCG website and locate my email me. I respond to all emails. The books, all 5 or 6 of them, I mean, they're out. And anywhere the books are sold, as Mike Leon would say. If you're interested in it, and it's about the idea of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in your own little way, all you have to do is contact me, and we'll send a complimentary copy to let you know I'm not just about book sales. So it's just as simple as that. You can go find me on Twitter. I think I'm on LinkedIn, but all that stuff is what it is. But the best way is just, go to UNC-Greensboro's website, click on it, you'll see my email, and then, that's a more personable entry, and I respond accordingly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated this conversation and all the layers that you unpacked and introduced, and all the amazing books that you're putting out there. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, of course, for listening to Educate US, a proud member of Leon Media Network. Make sure to download us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening via Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a 5-star review because that really helps us out. And make sure to join the conversation by emailing the show at theeducateusshow@gmail.com. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.